Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Safari Pedal Show. I'm your host, Abby. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Wild Safari Crazy Podcast Zoo Thing bandwagon. It's great to have you. I am extremely pumped for today's episode as we are continuing the amazing, educational, wonderful, and informative Clienting 101 miniseries.
Wow! Beautiful!
Nick Squillante, aka Squids, is going to be on the show, and we're going to be discussing his clienting journey, advice he has for new producers and engineers like myself that are just starting out. And I don't feel that there's anything more that I can add to this intro that would be useful information to y'all. So I guess let's cut to the episode. So guys, please give a very warm Safari welcome to Nick Squillante, aka Squids.
What's going on, Safari?
What's up? Welcome to the show.
Nothing much. Thanks for having me, Abby. It's a real pleasure to be here. I think this will be a lot of fun.
I've been really anticipating this episode, so thank you so much for dropping in.
I'm excited to hear what you have to say and what you have to ask, because believe me, I got stories.
I'm excited. So I feel like the first story we all need to hear about is the background of your name.
I get this question a lot, if you imagine, but so basically, I have a long last name. It's Squillante, right? And this goes way back, so I'm going to go to the details here. I used to play Little League Baseball, and there was another Nick S. So Nick S wasn't cutting it. And so I told the coaches to call me Squids because my brother was Squids. My uncle, literally years before I was even thought of, was Squids at the time. So I was like, call me Squids. And then that nickname actually carried and still carries to this day years later. So a few years back, I wanted to rebrand, the persona, the mixing and everything under like just a standard, something that you can identify, something you could see, like a logo. So I was like, what's cool? I mean, why not do something earnest, honest, close to home? Let's do Mixed by Squids. Because if you were to see me on the street and call me Squids, you'd probably get a better chance of me turning around than Nick. Let's put it that way. Like, I'm almost not used to being called Nick sometimes.
And it's like crazy. You come from a very long line of squids. Got to hold up the family
very long
name.
line of squids. Yep. I don't know if we swim very well, but yes.
Yes, sir. Amazing. So before we dive into today's episode and talk lots of exciting audio things, let's first start with your audio journey, a little bit of your audio life story and what you do.
Let's see. This goes back a ways. I mean, it really started with where I was looking to go to college, and it came down to a few schools in New York. Looked at a couple, applied to a couple. I knew I wanted to go away, et cetera, but I didn't know really what I wanted to do. Music's always been in my family, like the Squids nickname. So my brother is a musician and went to Berklee College of Music. My dad is a musician, pianist, and he taught middle school choir for like his whole life. So I've just been in a house of music. I was like, you know what? let me think about it. I'll just go to like music industry school. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that is. And then my best friend from high school also was like, I'm going to go there too. And I was like, done. Easy peasy. We're going. So it wasn't until my first year of school where I was like, all right, well, let me start a band with my buddies and, we'll do the thing. And we're like, oh, well, how are we going to record this stuff? So I went and bought, I remember it was like a PreSonus Fire Studio project. It was like an 8-track little thing. I had my MacBook Pro, and that was like my first studio in one of the dorm rooms. So we were just tracking stuff in there. I liked it a lot. It was fun. And then I found out that they had like this audio production course, and I had no idea. There was a minor for it and everything. So I was like, oh, let me focus in on this stuff. So I went to the first class and like immediately hit it off with the professor. And, he was like, gave me his cell, and I would ask him questions. Like when I'm working on other stuff, I'd go into his office, I'd show him mixes. And honestly, that was like a huge piece to be able to be like, all right, this guy like gets me, I want to learn more about this. And what I didn't mention before is when I was looking at schools, it was between going to school for music or going to school for video game design, believe it or not. I mean, you could see, maybe you could see there's like a TV and a PS5 behind me in the studio. So it's like, I need to have those things nearby. But I wanted to go to school for video game design or music. Obviously I went for music. It was easy. My buddy was going. I already got into school. Fine, whatever. But when I saw a mixing desk for the first time, I was like, whoa, this is like the biggest controller I've ever seen, and then I started thinking of like songs and how to get from point A to point B. It's like every time you do something great in a song, it feels like you just like beat a level, or you got to the next checkpoint, or like, oh, that's the sound. And the same thing goes for mixing. Like I still, every time I A B a ref when I'm done with a mix, and I'm like, that's where it was. Like my mind is blown by it. It's like I beat that game. That's what it feels like every time. So for me, in a weird sort of way, I was able to like, mesh the two in my brain. So every time I'm working or mixing on a song, it feels like I'm playing. It feels like a great time every time.
I really love your like analogy for mixing. Now I feel like I got to come up with my own.
It just felt so duh to me. I was like, oh, this is that for music. This is like what beating a game in real life feels like. I'm sure there's plenty of other examples, right? Like, but anyway, did the whole school thing, looking for internships, right? So my professor was really helpful in like, pulling up studios and all this stuff. And he was like, well, these, studio A, B, and C, whatever, like these studios are, you probably get an internship here, just apply, they'll get back to you. And then there's like this studio over here, and they were like, it's really hard to get an internship. You probably won't even hear back. And that was Electric Lady Studios. And I was like, I really want that one. It's just because that's kind of who I am. I applied there, I think like 3 times before I finally got a response from the assistant manager. Like, all right. Like, when do you want to come in for an interview? So I was like, oh, I can come in, blah, blah, blah this day. So I go in for the interview, and now I am in college mode, right? I am like suit, tie, like everything you just don't do in a studio. So I roll in there with my suit and my tie on. I'm waiting in the waiting room. There's like major artists like walking by to Studio A. Like it was at the time, it was like I saw Steve Jordan and Pino Palladino from the John Mayer Trio. I was like, what am I doing here? Like, this is insane. And then I went up to do the interview, and the first thing I did was like feel so ridiculous in this suit. So the first thing I said was like, should I lose the tie? And like I ripped it kind of off, and like, immediately the studio manager was like laughing, and we're having a good time. And, we talked a little bit about like all the stuff I mentioned previously. I did the internship for 3 months, and I had to go back to school. And what I did when I left is I printed out my entire college schedule, right? And then I highlighted the dates that I would be back in New York. And I said, call me if you need me. And they called me every time. And then finally, when school was all done, I asked them, I was like, listen, I would love a job here. Can I try out for the general assistant program, which is basically you make sure all the studios are ready for sessions. You're there as like a backup engineer if somebody needs you. Sometimes you'll engineer a session. I didn't care what it was. I was like, I just want to work here. So I did a tryout for the general assistant position, and they ended up saying, yeah, all right, we'll email you. You could, when you're going to start and all that stuff. As I'm walking out the door of Studio A, and now this is after a 9-hour day of like, setting up Studio A, make sure the input list is right, all the mics are in the right places, the vibe is right, the lighting, literally everything. I'm walking out the door, and the way it works at Studio A is you walk out, you make a right to go to the, outside, back to the street, and, go home. And then left, there's another studio. And I walked into Michael Brower's current assistant engineer, and he saw me, he goes, Nick, what are you doing here? I go, and I don't know why I said this, but I said, I'm looking for work. And he said, well, I got a job for you. Come on back this way. So I made the left, and immediately was Michael Brower's assistant engineer. Started training that night. So I stayed over there for 24 hours and started literally training that night. And then I met Michael. Meeting him was just like mind blowing to me because he's Michael Brower, and there's nothing much more that needs to be said about that. I worked at Electric Lady for Michael. And eventually I was like, I really love doing this and being an assistant and like working with these huge artists. But at the time, I'm like 22 or 23 or something like that. Like I had just left school. I didn't get the moment of what the hell do I do now that like everybody gets. I was just like right into working 2 weeks out of school. I was like missing that summer. My friends are all doing stuff like they don't have any responsibility, and those are all like weighing on me. Not a lot, but like just being like, I am 23. There's a lot of time to grow here. I don't have to be at this level so fast. That said, I stuck around. I learned a ton, and I decided like I want to kind of do this for me, as opposed to just, continue working for someone else. So I left, and I started just like doing independent gigs and taking on any client I could get. I didn't care if you were playing a didgeridoo or like, it didn't matter. If you played it, I recorded it. You know what I mean? And I did the whole thing from like recording, production, mixing, mastering, like the one-stop shop type of thing. And eventually I started just really like honing in on mixing, and like, I really loved it when I was in the studio with Michael, and it was just such a cool process. And again, it's that beating the video game mentality. Yeah, I focused on mixing and basically just got a few artists that were like really doing it, really trying to do it. Since then, I've moved to Brooklyn. I have a 914 Dolby Atmos studio, recognized by Dolby on their website. I have a Dolby Atmos certification, and I've just been mixing records for artists like Motley Crue. Let's see, we did Aloe Black, and by we I mean me and Nick and Squids, which are the same person.
All three of you.
Just, a bunch of stuff. Really, like it's come full circle from that moment where I left Electric Lady, and I was like, I want to do this for myself. And now at this part of my life, it's like, wow, like, I still have to pinch myself kind of every day and be like, you're doing that thing.
That's awesome. I guess diving into the world of clienting, since you said also in the beginning, you'd record, you played it, didgeridoo, you'd record it. So you got lots of stories under your belt.
I don't know why
sure.
I thought of didgeridoo, but it seemed out there enough.
Now I want to record one. How does one mic a didgeridoo? Got to think about that. But from when you started, how long did it take to land your first paid client, and how was that experience for you?
I would say I had the what's the word that I can use for that? Say like respect or trust. Trust, I think, is a better word, of Electric Lady being a place that I worked, and artists that I worked with, and Mike being under Michael Brower. Like, that was a big trust factor for a lot of people. So there wasn't a lot of like, I need something from you for free. Like, I don't necessarily do anything that's finished for free. Like, this is work, it's a job. You have to really, artists understand that, I feel like, a lot more today than they did back then. Like, everybody's so great with crediting people nowadays, as opposed to literally 10 years ago, or like even 7 years ago. Like, you have DSPs adding new things. So people are really understanding when you're like, hey, like, this is the price. But when it comes to that, there are free pieces that I throw in sometimes. Like, for new clients, if I really, really like the song and I'm like really feeling like I want to work on this, I'll tell them, listen, send me the stems, send me the files. I will mix. I'll do a first pass for free. And you have two options. One, you can take it and we'll move forward with whatever price we land on. And then B, you can just leave and there's no strings attached and go find someone else. Because at the end of the day, for me, it's the song that matters. It's not like, take me out of it, take you out of it. Obviously the artist and the mixer are important when it comes to like bringing this song to life, but the song needs to be respected. And if I'm not the guy for the job, I can't be mad at that. Then I'm just not the guy. My taste is not what you're looking for. So when it comes to like free, I still do that to this day. That's something I just feel like is it's a level of trust building that you need in an industry that has none.
Do you have any kind of main takeaways or lessons that you implement to this day in how you engage with people? Oh yeah.
I would say the biggest lesson, and I learned this from Michael, is don't assume anything, like nothing. If you have a note that you get from someone and you think it means one thing, but you're not sure, just ask. Don't assume that you know what the person's talking about at all times. Like, obviously, if it's a typo or something, you'd be like, okay, he wrote the instead of or something stupid like that. That's not what I'm talking about. It's like, can we bring out the sparkles? And there's no definition after, and you're like, what the hell are the sparkles? Could it be the high end on a vocal or something that he's talking about or she's talking about, or is it like the synth? Or you need to ask questions. Like, never assume, because at the end of the day, again, it's the song. Some people do fantastic notes, right? Some people have time code, they're numbered, they're listed, it's beautiful. Some people just like stream of consciousness, like, I'm just typing away here, or I'm texting you, or I'll like drop a letter off, like, in the mailbox. That never happens. But yeah, don't assume anything. That would be my main thing when talking with people, because at the end of the day, again, everybody's different too. So like, what you think someone said might not be what they meant. It's always subject to any type of like, oh, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. So ask yourself the questions, and also don't necessarily feel like you have to do everything that they say to the extent of their knowledge. And I'll explain what I mean by that. If someone says, hey, the vocal feels like too loud. And then they have another note, like the first note's like, let's bring the vocal down. Hey, and then the next note is, hey, can we bring the high end of the vocal down? Make sure that you know that those two are going to correlate with presence, right? So like if we take the high end of the vocal down, it's automatically going to start sitting back in the mix a bit. So maybe note number one doesn't need to happen. And sometimes that's why you're the mixer. That's why you're the professional doing it. You have to see these bits of notes that may make total sense, right? They're obviously one and one. They're right there. And that could be the moment where you say, oh, let me jump on a call and say, listen, so I took the high end down. Vocal feels like it's sitting good. Do you want to pass? Do you want me to still lower it further? And they could say, yes, please, or no, leave it if you feel like it's good. So that's one of those moments for sure.
That's a great piece of advice. And I also like how you phrase that hypothetical taking the vocal down. Like it was really like transparent.
Yeah.
Kind of like nothing happening, I guess, in the dark for the artist. So that's something that I noticed.
Yeah. Oh, that's the people. And I've heard so many mixers and producers who have like, that special button that they click. That's like the button that makes people happier and it does nothing, like quote unquote button. That's not me at all. And I would not recommend doing that ever because again, like, yeah, you're the mixer, but you're not the artist. You're not the person who wants their song to sound a certain way. You're not the person who's got to wear the song like a jacket when they get on stage and sing it and perform it. You're the guy they hired to make sure it sounds fully realized in their vision. Like that's important. That is very important. I've heard tons of horror stories of people who are like, oh, my last mixer told me it was my fault. And I'm like, what? Like how could you possibly work with someone who blames you? Or like, in other words, if you're working with a mixer who's like telling you it can't be done or like saying no or saying I know best, this and that, like just find a new mixer because it's not the kind of person that should be working in that spot at all.
I can't believe like you saying that someone said that to them. That's shocking and really, really bad. It's horrible.
I've heard it so many times. And then I get like emails when I'm done with songs like this was like the greatest experience ever. Thank you. And that goes back to the word of mouth and the trust thing and how things spread. Almost
all the engineers I've spoken to that do music full time, the main takeaways have really been like, don't be an ass. Just like be a nice person. Like I'm like, but shouldn't that kind of be like the bar is low if that's like
right?
Wow.
I mean, we're not trying to like not asking for much, right?
Yeah.
Like just be a good person. One of the really cool things that Michael Brower taught me is like he was just like, I don't care what's going on in the outside world. When I come to the studio, I put that behind me and I shut the door, And then I work on the song. That's the only thing that matters at that moment. And then when you leave, you can go take care of your shit. Like, then excuse my French.
So on that note, like this show in general is really centered around the theme of starting out, being new. What are some of your maybe pieces of advice and tips for producers and engineers that are starting out, whether that be how they talk to clients, how they handle conversations about money?
Act like you are on the other end of the call too. Like you wouldn't want to deal with like a slimy business person when you're trying to talk to someone. Like if you have a price, but you're willing to negotiate, which like happens all the time, especially for indie artists. Sometimes labels hit me up and like, hey, can we do this and swap this number here? And it's like, okay, like don't try to stonewall it or pretend like you're not going to negotiate if you will at some point. Just be like, listen, I'm down. Let's do it. Let's figure it out. Like there's no need for 10 emails back and forth, mind games. Like maybe you can call that bad business, but to me, it's just like, it's so much easier to cut through the BS and work and do good work if that kind of stuff doesn't weigh on you. And like, just be honest. Again, it comes that trust. That trust word is so big because this industry, again, is just full of people that you can't trust. I'm not alluding to labels. Like not all labels are bad. You know what I mean? Not everybody steals your music. That's just like the TikTok narrative. You know what I mean? Sometimes when you get signed to a label, that boosts your career. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, they took my music. Well, would it matter if they didn't? If they never saw you? Who knows? You can't say X without Y, or A without B in that situation. Like that could be one of the main reasons you're where you are. So again, trust. Trust is big, but don't blindly trust. Just offer trust, like be honest with people and they'll tend to be honest back with you.
I gotta put offer trust on a t-shirt. That was like Proper trust. At the end of every episode, I always ask our amazing guests to drop a piece of advice, anything you want to say to the amazing Studio Animal viewers. Honestly, feel free to freestyle.
Sure. I mean, I would say there's a lot of like sprinkles of just alluding to trust and stuff throughout this whole episode. And I'd say make sure people can trust you. And not only that, but like trust yourself. Don't dive into too many forums and try doing too much of what other people do, because it needs to be yours, right? It needs to be, you need to know the ins and outs of your thing. Like, don't go downloading, some template and expect it to just be like, I'm great now. It doesn't work like that. Like, you need to work through, sure, use it for learning, try to understand it, but also make sure you make your own way in this, like make your own sound. Influence is huge, obviously. Inspiration is huge. Like, don't be afraid to be inspired by people, but don't get caught up with like the Reddit troll or like the random TikTok video where they're showing you half of the story when they're like, oh, this is how I got this vocal sound with R compressor and EQ and a DS, or, oh, did you mention the Neve preamp and the CL1B you were going into to record the vocal, or the 251 microphone, or, it's like, don't get caught up in that stuff. Just like listen to a lot of great songs, listen to great mixes, listen to great podcasts like this where like you get long form information. That's the best way to kind of format your experience coming up, because it can get hairy when you start going down these rabbit holes of do's and don'ts, because at the end of the day with music, there's no rules, right? It's like, it's creative. It's supposed to feel a certain way. If you think a mix sounds bad, objectively, it might sound great to someone else, so do your best. And that would be my big piece of advice. It's simple. If it sounds good, it's good. Don't overthink it.
Yeah, that was great. I feel like that needs a clap. That was wonderful.
I'll take that. I'll take that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for hopping on the podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, Abby.
Thanks for hopping on. I'm so pumped for this episode.
I just remember the promises meant for me. I know the enemy and that he's sent for me. I keep the blood of the lemons, my centerpiece. I cannot trust you, no